The scent of blooming jasmine carried on a cool mountain breeze, once mingled with a distinct aroma of crushed herbs, and some whispers claimed the faintest hint of opium. High in the rugged and forgiving peaks of Persia, nestled amongst crags and inaccessible valleys, an order emerged that would, for centuries, cast a long shadow over the political landscape of the medieval Middle East. They were known by many names, and indeed, their true nature was shrouded in layers of myth and deliberate obfuscation. But perhaps the most enduring, and certainly the most evocative, was the name whispered in fear and awe, the Hashashin. The story of this remarkable and often misunderstood order is not one of grand, bloody crusades, but rather a meticulous, patient, and deeply intricate chronicle of influence, ideology, and an astonishingly effective, if terrifying, brand of applied political philosophy. To truly understand their legacy, we must first trace the seeds of their formation, a journey that takes us back to a period of intellectual ferment and profound spiritual yearning in the heart of the Islamic world. Our journey begins in the 11th century, a time of considerable upheaval and intellectual dynamism across the vast expanse of the Persian world. The Seljuk Turks had established a powerful empire, but their rule, while imposing, was not universally accepted, and internal divisions, along with external pressures from Byzantine ambitions and the burgeoning Crusader presence in the Levant, created an environment ripe for the emergence of novel political and religious movements. It was within this context that a remarkable figure, Hassani Sabah, began to lay the groundwork for what would become one of history's most legendary and perhaps most misconstrued organizations. Hassani Sabah was born in or around the city of Qom, a significant center of Shia scholarship, sometime in the mid-11th century. His early life was marked by a rigorous education. He studied mathematics, astronomy, philosophy, and, crucially, religious doctrine. He was drawn to the Ismaili branch of Shia Islam, a sect that traced its lineage back to Ismail, the eldest son of the sixth Imam, Jafar al-Sadiq. The Ismailis had a distinct theological outlook, emphasizing esotericism, the concept of an imam as the divinely appointed spiritual and temporal leader, and a cyclical view of history. They believed in the outward, exoteric meaning of religious texts, but also in a deeper, hidden, esoteric meaning, accessible only to those initiated into their mysteries. This doctrine of ta'wil, or allegorical interpretation, formed a cornerstone of Ismaili thought. During his formative years, Hassani Sabah traveled extensively, engaging with scholars and absorbing the intellectual currents of the age. He eventually made his way to Cairo, the vibrant capital of the Fatimid Caliphate, which was then the preeminent Ismaili state. The Fatimids, who claimed descent from Fatima, the daughter of the Prophet Muhammad, and Ali, his cousin and son-in-law, were a powerful force, ruling over Egypt, parts of North Africa, and the Levant. In Cairo, Hassani Sabah became deeply involved in Ismaili circles, rising through the ranks and gaining considerable recognition for his intellect and piety. However, his time in Cairo was not without its difficulties. The Fatimid court was a complex web of political intrigue, and Hassani Sabah eventually fell out of favor, or perhaps he perceived a growing corruption within the Fatimid hierarchy that conflicted with his own ideals. Sources suggest a period of mild exile or, at the very least, a departure under less than ideal circumstances. Following his departure from Fatimid territory, Hassani Sabah embarked on a new path, one that would lead him to establish his own independent domain. He returned to Persia, a land that was, at the time, largely under Seljuk suzerainty. The Seljuks, being Sunni Muslims, viewed the Ismailis with suspicion and often hostility. Hassani Sabah understood that to pursue his mission, he needed a secure base, a sanctuary from which he could propagate his teachings and organize his followers. His search for such a place led him to the formidable Alborz Mountains, a rugged range that forms a natural barrier to the north of the central Persian plateau. It was here, in the year 1092, that Hassani Sabah discovered his ultimate stronghold, a formidable, naturally fortified mountain known as Alamut, meaning eagle's nest. The fortress, already partially built by a local ruler, was ideally situated. Perched on a high, rocky ridge, it offered commanding views of the surrounding valleys and was incredibly difficult to access. The approach was treacherous, a narrow, winding path that could be easily defended. The fortress itself was strategically positioned, with natural defences augmented by the construction and expansion undertaken by Hassani Sabah and his growing band of followers. The establishment of Alamut marked a turning point. It became the administrative and spiritual heart of the nascent order. Hassani Sabah, a man of austere habits and unwavering conviction, began to shape his organization according to his vision. He was not interested in outright conquest in the traditional sense. His goal was more subtle, more pervasive. He sought to create an elite cadre of devoted followers, men trained in intellectual persuasion, espionage, and, when necessary, decisive action. The Ismaili Dawah, or mission, under Hassani Sabah, became increasingly structured. He implemented a hierarchical system, often referred to as the Hudud al-Din, the degrees of religion. At the apex was the Imam, represented by Hassani Sabah himself as his hujjah, or proof. Below him were various ranks of dais, or missionaries, each with their own sphere of influence and level of knowledge. The organization was designed to be highly compartmentalized. Initiates would only be told what was necessary for their understanding and their role. This secrecy was not merely for security, it was integral to the Ismaili doctrine of gradual enlightenment. The recruitment process was meticulous. Potential followers were carefully observed and screened. Those who showed intellectual curiosity, strong moral character, and devotion to the cause were invited to learn. The education was rigorous, encompassing not only religious philosophy but also logic, rhetoric, and history. A key aspect of their training, and one that contributed to their fearsome reputation, was the cultivation of absolute loyalty and self-discipline. The name Hashashin itself is a subject of considerable debate among historians. The most popular, though likely apocryphal, etymology connects it to hashish, a preparation of cannabis. The story goes that Hassani Sabah would give his followers hashish, creating a paradise-like experience in lush gardens, promising them a similar reward in the afterlife if they carried out their missions. This sensationalized account, propagated by Crusader chroniclers and later Arabic writers who were often hostile to the Ismailis, served to demonize the order and portray them as debauched fanatics. However, modern scholarship largely rejects this interpretation. The term Hashashin may have derived from hashishiyin, meaning people who are constant in the use of hashish, but this could have been a derogatory epithet used by their enemies, or it might have referred to a slang term for their secretive, somewhat detached demeanor. Another plausible theory suggests the name is a corruption of Asasiyun, derived from asas, meaning foundation, referring to their belief in the fundamental truths of Islam, or possibly referring to Hassani Sabah's claim to be the foundation of a new spiritual era. Regardless of its precise origin, the name Hashashin became synonymous with covert action and a chilling effectiveness. The strategic genius of Hassani Sabah lay in understanding the power of targeted disruption. Instead of engaging in large-scale battles, which they could not win against the vast Seljuk armies, the Hashashin employed a strategy of focused assassinations. Their targets were not random individuals. They were the key figures whose removal would destabilize the enemy, sow fear, and create political vacuums. These were often Seljuk viziers, governors, or military commanders who posed a direct threat to the Ismaili presence. The assassinations were carried out with a chilling precision and a profound understanding of psychological warfare. The assassins, often referred to as fedayeen, meaning those who sacrificed themselves, were rigorously trained. They would infiltrate enemy camps, courts, or cities, blending in with the populace. They operated in small, coordinated groups, and their attacks were often carried out in public places, leaving no doubt as to who was responsible. The boldness and audacity of these acts, often involving the assassin standing their ground after the deed, or even presenting themselves to the authorities, were intended to maximize fear and demonstrate the order's reach. One of the most famous early targets was Nizam al-Mulk, the powerful and influential Seljuk vizier, a man instrumental in consolidating Seljuk power and a staunch opponent of the Ismailis. In 1092, just months after Hassani Sabah established Alamut, Nizam al-Mulk was assassinated on his way to Baghdad. The deed was carried out by a young Persian who, according to some accounts, disguised himself as a beggar. The assassination of such a prominent figure sent shockwaves through the Seljuk administration and cemented the Hashashin's reputation as a force to be reckoned with. The success of these operations was not merely due to bravery, it was a result of meticulous planning, intelligence gathering, and a deep understanding of the political landscape. The Hashashin developed an extensive network of informants and agents across the Seljuk Empire. They understood who held power, where they traveled, and their daily routines. This intelligence was vital for selecting targets and executing missions flawlessly. The mountain fortresses beyond Alamut became the backbone of the Hashashin network. Over time, they established a series of fortified bases throughout Persia and later in Syria. These included formidable strongholds like Lamsar, Girdku, and Shakdis in Persia, and later in Syria, Masyaf, Kawabi, and Kadmus. These fortresses were not just military outposts, they were centers of learning, administration, and self-sufficiency. They were often strategically located in remote valleys or atop inaccessible peaks, making them virtually impregnable to conventional siege warfare. The construction and maintenance of these fortresses were feats of engineering. They were carved into the rock, integrated with the natural landscape, and equipped with sophisticated water management systems, granaries, and defensive fortifications. The inhabitants lived a disciplined, communal life, dedicated to the Ismaili faith and the mission of the order. The Hashashin's influence extended far beyond the immediate impact of their assassinations. Their existence created a pervasive atmosphere of fear among rulers and officials who might oppose them. This fear often translated into a willingness to appease the order, to grant them concessions, or at least to avoid provoking them. The Hashashin, in essence, became a political instrument of terror, but one wielded with calculated restraint and strategic purpose. The order's ideology, though esoteric and accessible only to the initiated, was a powerful unifying force. It provided a framework for unwavering loyalty and a sense of divine purpose. The concept of the Imam, the infallible spiritual guide, was central to this. Followers believed they were acting in accordance with a higher will, a belief that undoubtedly contributed to their fearlessness in the face of death. The Crusades, which began in the late 11th century, added a new and complex dimension to the Hashashin's history. The arrival of European knights in the Levant brought them into direct contact with both the Muslim rulers and the Hashashin themselves. Initially, the Crusaders had little understanding of this formidable order hidden in the mountains. Their chroniclers, relying on fragmented reports and often fueled by their own prejudices, painted vivid, albeit often inaccurate, pictures of the Hashashin. Some Crusader accounts, particularly those from the mid-12th century, depict the Hashashin as a relatively cooperative force. Figures like Raymond of Poitiers, Prince of Antioch, and Raymond II, Count of Tripoli, are said to have engaged in alliances with the Hashashin, or at least maintained a degree of uneasy coexistence. There are accounts of the Hashashin providing military assistance, or, more commonly, using their unique methods to eliminate common enemies. In one particularly famous instance, it is reported that the Hashashin were asked by Conrad of Montferrat, who was vying for the throne of Jerusalem, to assassinate his rival, Guy of Lusignan. However, Conrad himself met his end at the hands of two Ismaili assassins in 1192, shortly after being crowned King of Jerusalem. This incident, while adding to the lore, highlights the complex and often shifting alliances of the era. The relationship between the Crusaders and the Hashashin was not always amicable. There were periods of conflict and mutual suspicion. However, the sheer effectiveness of the Hashashin as a deterrent and a strategic asset meant that many Crusader leaders sought to avoid direct confrontation. Some, like the Knights Templar and the Knights Hospitaller, were themselves formidable military orders, and perhaps understood the value of a well-disciplined, dedicated organization. The protracted period of the Crusades also saw the expansion of the Hashashin influence into Syria. Following Hassani Sabbah's death in 1124, his successors, most notably Bahram al-Dajjami and later Rashid al-Din Sinan, continued to develop the order. Rashid al-Din Sinan, often referred to as the Old Man of the Mountain by the Crusaders, was a charismatic and shrewd leader who consolidated the Syrian branch of the order. He established the famous fortress of Masyaf as his seat of power and skillfully navigated the complex political landscape of Crusader states, Ayyubid principalities, and local powers. Sinan's leadership is marked by a period of significant influence, and also by a number of legendary accounts, often embellished by later writers. He is said to have engaged in a subtle game of diplomacy and intimidation with figures like Saladin. While Saladin, a formidable warrior and statesman, was a staunch opponent of the Crusader presence, he also recognized the potential threat and strategic advantage that the Hashashin represented. There are accounts of Saladin receiving warnings from the Hashashin, or even experiencing failed assassination attempts that he attributed to them. One of the most iconic and likely apocryphal stories associated with Rashid al-Din Sinan involves his legendary demonstration of power to the visiting King Richard the Lionheart during the Third Crusade. According to this tale, Richard, impressed by the Hashashin's reputation, demanded to see proof of their abilities. Sinan, in response, ordered 2 of his men to throw themselves from the battlements of Masyaf to their deaths, thereby showcasing their absolute obedience and willingness to sacrifice themselves at a command. While this dramatic account is almost certainly a fabrication, likely concocted by later writers to explain the immense fear the Hashashin inspired, it speaks volumes about their perceived power and the psychological impact they had. The internal workings of the Hashashin order are a subject of much speculation, largely due to their deliberate secrecy. However, archaeological evidence and surviving textual fragments provide some insights. Their communities within the fortresses were structured and disciplined. Life was communal, with an emphasis on religious devotion, scholarly pursuits, and martial training. The diet was simple, and the atmosphere was one of austere dedication. The philosophical underpinnings of their faith, particularly the Ismaili emphasis on reason and intellectual inquiry alongside faith, contributed to a unique intellectual environment within their strongholds. They preserved and studied a vast array of texts, and their leaders were often accomplished scholars and theologians. This intellectual tradition, combined with their martial prowess, made them a multifaceted force. The perception of the Hashashin in the West was heavily influenced by the writings of travelers and chroniclers. Figures like Marco Polo, who visited the region in the late 13th century, helped to popularize the order in Europe. Polo's account, though containing elements of exaggeration and hearsay, described a legendary garden created by an old man of the mountain, where young men were sent after being drugged with opium to experience sensual pleasures before being sent on missions of assassination, promising them eternal bliss upon death. This narrative, while contributing to the enduring mystique of the Hashashin, further cemented the association with hashish and sensual temptations, obscuring the more complex realities of their organization and ideology. The decline of the Hashashin was a gradual process, marked by internal strife, changing political dynamics, and the rise of new, more formidable powers. The Mongol invasions of the 13th century proved to be a devastating blow. The Mongol armies, under commanders like Hulagu Khan, were relentless and far more effective at siege warfare than previous adversaries. In 1256, the Mongols besieged and captured Alamut, dismantling its formidable defenses and effectively ending the reign of the Persian Hashashin. The Syrian branch of the order, though weakened, managed to survive for a longer period. They found themselves caught between the Mamluks of Egypt and the resurgent Crusader presence. The Mamluks, under Sultan Baybars, were particularly adept at subduing the Ismaili strongholds. Baybars, having himself a complex history with the Hashashin, managed to break their power, absorbing some of their skilled fighters into his own armies and systematically dismantling their fortresses. By the late 13th century, the organized military and political power of the Hashashin had effectively been extinguished. However, the legacy of the Hashashin endured. Their story, filtered through centuries of retelling, exaggeration, and mythologizing, became ingrained in the historical consciousness of both the East and the West. They represented an almost mythical force, a testament to the power of conviction, organization, and the strategic use of fear. The historical reality of the Hashashin, stripped of the sensationalism, reveals a remarkably disciplined and intellectually sophisticated order. They were not simply bloodthirsty fanatics, but rather a highly organized political and religious movement that employed a unique strategy to survive and exert influence in a turbulent era. Their story is a testament to the enduring power of ideology, the effectiveness of covert action, and the profound impact that a small, dedicated group can have on the course of history. The mountain strongholds, now largely in ruins, stand as silent witnesses to this extraordinary chapter. Alamut, Lamsar, Masyaf. These names echo with the whispers of a time when fear and precision, faith and strategy were woven together to create an order that, for a brief but significant period, cast a long and unforgettable shadow over the medieval world. Their meticulous planning, their unwavering loyalty, and their terrifyingly effective application of their mission continue to fascinate and intrigue, a reminder that history, in its most detailed and factual form, can indeed be an endlessly unfolding narrative, a quiet yet profound testament to human endeavor and the intricate tapestry of the past. The echoes of their existence, the silent stones of their fortresses, and the enduring mystique of their name all contribute to a historical narrative that, while undeniably compelling, possesses a certain rhythm and detail that can lull the mind into a state of calm contemplation, allowing the weight of centuries to gently settle.